Hello again. Looks like it's time for part 2 of the bunny build. First off, I just want to correct a mistake that I made in my first YouTube video. I really messed up the dates during which all this happened, so everything that happened in the first episode of Bunny Build actually took place between March 2022 and April 2022, so really only 2 months, not the whole summer, not even the whole spring really. So when I talked about being cold, it was because it was early spring, not fall. My bad. Anyway, at this point in the video, we're in about early April 2022. The floors were looking pretty good, but they lacked structural integrity, so the next step was to reinforce the floors. For this, I used this big chunk of steel, which I cut symmetrically in two to form two identical pieces. At some point, Bunny's little exhaust got in the way, so I ripped it out. It was super tiny and really gross. As a general PSA, you're going to see me do some really sketchy things when it comes to safety in some of these videos. Just because I'm doing them does not mean it's the correct way. In fact, because I'm doing them, it's probably the incorrect way. You have been warned. I used an L-shaped piece of metal to span across the car, and you can see that it's lying across these two beams that look a little crusty, but they're very structural. It was getting harder and harder for Bunny to start, but I wasn't too worried about it at the time, because I had Frank's Matrix to boost her with. Bunny was open headers for a while, and I'm sure she was the bane of everyone's existence in the neighborhood. My schedule largely revolved around Bunny. I'd show up in the morning, work on her a bit, go to classes on campus, and then head right back over to keep working on her. But it wasn't all work and no play, because I'm easily distracted, and there were all sorts of cool things to look at, like these metal shavings, and looking at the sun through my welding helmet, which you should not do. Please. I'm not great with loud noises, so I do have my noise-canceling earbuds in almost all the time. Most of Bunny's metal interior surfaces were covered in this kind of tar-like, sticky, gooey substance, which I think is adhesive for the insulation. I'm sure it was better when it was installed, but it looks like it's gone bad. It was really hard to remove. And I learned the hard way that cheap tools don't pay off. Based on that lesson, I got this sweet Dickies uniform to save some of my clothes. It was a little pricey, but also sturdy and comfy. As April turned to May, I knew that I was going to have to move Bunny soon because I landed an internship in another part of Ohio. At this point, I hadn't put a seat bracket in yet, so I replaced it with a piece of firewood and hoped for the best. Bunny's tire size was so tiny that I had to call a bunch of different shops, but finally I found one that had her size. I wondered how long it had been since she'd been in a real shop. Once I had my new tires, I loaded up Bunny with some of my belongings, and with a friend trailing me in his truck with the rest of my stuff, we set out on the highway heading north. I'd put about 20% of my exhaust back on, so Bunny was straight piped and it was impossible to hear anything. So I opted to wear my noise-canceling headphones with noise-canceling earbuds underneath. Over the summer semester, I'd stay in this pretty house in the tiny town of Salina. I lived in the attic behind these top 3 windows. In such a manicured neighborhood, Bunny stood out like a sore thumb. But luckily, there was a big garage which my roommates gave me sole rights to after seeing the state of Bunny's seals. I made a quick stop by a junkyard where I pulled the exhaust off a Maserati Ghibli on a whim. I cut it open to see what was inside and also to make it fit under Bunny. While I mocked it up nicely, I never ended up installing it. I replaced Bunny's shifter linkage in an attempt to solve the mystery of Bunny's lost reverse gear, but it didn't really do anything. So no reverse gear and no interior, I drove to work every day about 30 minutes. Sometimes I carpooled with a roommate, and instead of a passenger seat, used a lawn chair. I treated myself somewhat prematurely to these bucket seats off Amazon. My boyfriend at the time lived in Cincinnati, which was about a 4-hour round trip from Salina, and like an idiot, I made the trip every weekend. On one such trip, it was raining a little bit, and I noticed that my wipers were moving really slowly, so I took a video to document it. Unfortunately, the cause of the slow wipers was an empty battery, and I ended up stranded on the side of the road. I set out flares and called emergency services, and they came out and gave me a jump. After a few minutes of charging, I was able to hobble Bunny off, but the same problem happened just a little bit down the road. Luckily, I was pretty close to Cincinnati, so my boyfriend came out and escorted me all the way into Cincinnati, jumping Bunny when we had to. We used a flashlight instead of my headlights to save battery. The next morning, I used my multimeter to find out that there was no charge coming off the alternator. There wasn't much I could do, so I bundled Bunny up on the street and pretty much left her where she fell. Luckily, a very kind friend lent me her car, which had been in an accident and looked pretty rough. Nothing my I-can-fix-him attitude couldn't handle, though. I drove this car around for quite a while, visiting Cincinnati every weekend to work on Bunny. Despite my love for Bunny, it was really nice to drive something safe again. I spent the whole summer struggling to find the right alternator and one that worked and didn't get stolen for Bunny. Because she was located so far away, I didn't really get much time to work on her, so there wasn't much progress that summer. Luckily, come July, she was driving again, but I didn't take her back up to Salina in fear of the whole fiasco happening again. I also knew that in a month or so, I would have to put her into storage in Mason, a town near Cincinnati. And at the end of August, I crammed her into a little storage unit with all of my things. I packed 2 bags and headed out for 5 months of study abroad, but I'd actually end up staying away much longer than I'd expected. I studied design at Tama University in Tokyo from July to November, and ended up staying till February to pursue 2 internships. After that, instead of heading back home to Bunny, I moved to Belgium for another internship until May, which led to me having left Bunny for almost a year. It was a long time to be away, but I got some really good ideas for Bunny's future. When I got back home in May of 2023, Bunny was waiting for me just as I'd left her. She probably thought that she was finally catching a break, but no such luck, Bunny. I drove her home back to the same apartment that I had had when I first got her in Cincinnati. She was doing pretty well with her new alternator, and she was chugging along the highway at her top speed of 60 miles per hour. Later on, I took her light bar off, but this is a view I'll always miss. One room of my apartment became dedicated to Bunny parts, like my own miniature junkyard. At this point, I had exactly 1 year of school left, a summer semester, a fall semester, and a spring semester. And this is when things with Bunny really got serious. At the end of my internships in Japan, I'd landed a full-time job for right after graduation, so I knew that I really only had 1 year left to be with Bunny. My college major was design, and the way that the program works is that at the very last semester, all students make what's called their capstone project, which is a kind of final project. Usually this project is a type of designed product with a poster, an explanation, and a booklet that goes with it, as well as a presentation. But with the security of my new job, I decided to let my rebellious nature out and started hatching a plan. I decided to make Bunny my final capstone project, which was not very well received by my professors. But you can't really make anything cool if you don't take risks. So during the summer semester of 2023, I worked on prepping Bunny and planning what I wanted to do with her. This involved a lot of cleaning, a lot of research on parts, and making a full-scale CAD model. Making an actual car as my final project was super unorthodox, but I made alliances with some professors who saw the vision, and I kept quiet about it for the most part. This is because I was afraid that more critical professors would call me out for the fact that this was just a passion project, and they would have been right about that. Knowing that Bunny was going to be incapacitated soon, and because I'd always really wanted a motorcycle, I decided to get a secondary vehicle to get around while Bunny was immobile. I got really lucky on Facebook Marketplace and I bought this adorable ZG1000. It's pretty big as a first bike, but she was only $650 and I bought her from a really sweet old man in Cleves. I named her Steak due to her meatiness, coming in at about 750 pounds of dry weight and 1000 cc's of displacement. Now, since I was back at the apartment where I couldn't work on Bunny, I agreed with a friend to move Bunny to his house. I'll refer to this friend as Mark from now on. At this point, Bunny wasn't really safe to make the drive, so I got her towed out to Oxford, Ohio, which is about 45 minutes from Cincinnati. Mark lived in a duplex in Oxford, and he had plenty of driveway space for us. The tow was fairly cheap, about $180, but it was pretty nerve-wracking watching Bunny bounce up and down on the back of the truck while getting completely soaked on the inside. Bunny has a sort of history with trucks breaking down around her. Mark had 2 trucks break down while escorting us, and this huge truck towing her also broke down. I'm convinced this is some sort of weird superpower that Bunny has. I'm surprised she's even made it this far. There was really nothing that we could do, so Mark and I continued on towards his house, leaving Bunny in the tow truck to wait for another tow truck. I'd found some good parts on Facebook Marketplace, so we went and picked them up. I got a fuel cell, 2 manifolds, and a Chevy intake. Bunny finally arrived a good 4 hours after we had set out, and I found her a spot on the driveway where she would stay for the better part of a year. My plans for Bunny were pretty extreme. I'd always wanted a project car, but since this was my first, not only project car, but first car, engine swapping, transmission swapping, and building an entire cage was going to be a pretty big task. Nevertheless, I decided on an LS swap for Bunny. I had no experience working on cars, but from what I'd found online, an LS swap was one of the easier engine swaps to do. So, using this model that I created by hand measuring the car, I spent hundreds of hours designing the exterior and internals of Bunny. The exterior design in particular changed quite a bit over time, and I didn't do all of the designing before I started actually building Bunny, but I figured I'd show it all here in one spot. After plenty of sketches and 3D models, I came to the final design, which is a retro-futuristic take on what Bunny looked like originally. I wanted to keep some of the charm of her original design while making her look as badass as possible. I knew I'd have to make her a tube chassis, because her fragile unibody would never stand a chance against all that weight. The chassis design wasn't perfect, but for a budget build, it looked pretty good to me. I chose a design that was light, inexpensive, and pretty strong. I finished the actual final design around spring 2024, but I'll just show it to you here. I had no idea how I was going to make any of these panels, but, we'll fall off that bridge when you come to it. I wanted this really wide open back design, kind of like those bumper deletes on Lamborghinis, and an overall just kind of Mad Maxy vibe. I placed the engine where the back seats used to be, which butted up really close to the driver's seat, but I figured it would fit. I didn't really know how to make her rear-wheel drive from here, but I googled it and someone said that you could put pretty much any transmission with any engine, so I thought, why not? And I decided on an early 2000s Porsche Boxster transmission. In hindsight, there was some serious flaws to these designs, but I didn't know anything about cars, so it was about as good as I could come up with on the spot. Because I had no experience working on cars, and I'm not really interested in car restoration YouTubes and whatnot, I really had no exposure to car building. So this project is full of rookie mistakes, but because I used Bunny as my guinea pig, I did learn a lot. I plan to start the build at the beginning of the fall semester of 2023. So I knew that before then, I would have to assemble as many parts as I could so I would be ready to start right away. On a trip to Tennessee, Mark happened upon a nice LS engine, which, with my permission, he bought for me and I paid him back for. I also bought a Porsche transmission online, sight unseen. It came from a salvage car in Florida, and because it wasn't a flood car, I was alright with it. I also knew that I'd be replacing all the important bits. On weekends, Mark would pick me up and drive me up to his house so that I could work on unboxing, prepping, and cleaning. I also made good use of the sand blaster at school to clean my manifolds. The blaster was pretty faulty, so it did take a long time, but it was definitely better than doing it with a wire brush. I also bought Boxster hubs and subframes from the same junkyard, but a different car. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for part 3. Later.